So I will just take a minute. I will just share my screen and we'll take it from there on. Okay, I hope you're able to see my screen. All right. Are you able to see my screen? Is there any
Yes,
show of
Professor.
hands? Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So I have titled systematic approach for fundraising. Many may find systematic is a very technical term. What do we really mean by systematic, right? Is there something called as unsystematic approach for fundraising? Right? So essentially, what I mean for a long time that we have been trying to do is, we're all trying to see if we can think like engineers. So it means that if there is certain input and then there is a process and then that results to an output. Right? If we are really giving a certain input, and if the process is predictable, then the output is also predictable, right? So that essentially is what everybody is comfortable with, right? So people would like to have a certain output, and so therefore if I am willing to give certain inputs, and if the process is predictable, then the output should be predictable. So this, in a way, what we can call it as a very, predictable, right? It's a very predictable or a systematic approach. Then there is something called as a, serendipity approach, right? So you never know how things work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not work, right? And when there is a little bit of unpredictability, then obviously there is a lot of questions that is asked. So remember, let's say, today we are really talking about so much in terms of percentages, right? And there is a lot of things that is being discussed about the two vaccines. There are two COVID vaccines that is being that is being used in the country today, right? So there is one which is the AstraZeneca developed by Serum Institute of India, and then there is another one that is being developed by the Bharat Vaccines, right? So if you really look at if you really look at what's actually happening in the market and which are the vaccines that is a better uptake, so the Serum Institute vaccine is obviously having a lot more acceptance. Right? Why there is a lot more acceptance? Because there is a very clear number, right? There's a number that is associated which says that it has such an amount of efficiency, right? The probability that the vaccine is successful is 90% or 95% or whatever it may be, right? So people will always want to predict. Uh, I am taking a vaccine and I want to be reasonably sure that I am protected, right? So that essentially is the domain of predictability, and so that is what I mean by a systematic approach. If there are 5 or 6 steps in the fundraising process, if I take those 5 or 6 steps in a very conscientious manner, in a very what I should say, in a very serious manner with a lot of earnest, then I should be successful in my fundraising approach. Right? So that is your systematic approach. Then the other is your serendipity. Today, what many people talk about, let's say, the spray and pray kind of an approach, where you do something, you hope that things will work out, but then ultimately you cannot bank on hope, right? There has to be certain solid ground in which you can hope on. So in simply trying to hope that somebody will fund it might not give good results. So I'm going to talk about can we really make this whole process of fundraising in a very scientific approach. We will try to see if we could if we could try to segmentize in different forms so that each of it can becomes fairly manageable. So with this a little bit of prelude, let me go to the slide. Right? Let's say, for example, say you are shown a slide like this, right? So you come across a slide like this, and then I don't know how many of you are able to read the script. What do you make out of it, right? So what is it? I'm assuming that, let's say, a majority of you are not able to read it, right? So, but there is some information out here, right? There is some information out here. So it's just we are not able to decipher what is this information here, right? So this is the first major problem that we find in the fundraising process, right? So it is a problem that what we call it as information asymmetry, right? So people don't understand each other's language, right? So so whatever I've shown here, right? Whatever I have shown here, it's a perfectly credible a language. There is some content that is here, but it just that not many people will be able to read this. Not many people will be decipher this. So that is essentially what is called as information asymmetry. Right? People don't understand each other's language. So when I say each other's language, I do not mean the literal sense of the language, but then people do not understand ideas, right? People do not understand ideas. When I say people here, in the context of entrepreneurship, we are really talking about two categories of people. One is people who have ideas. People essentially mean that they are essentially startups and entrepreneurs and founders and so on. And the second is the investors, people who have capital. Right? So for ideas and capitals to exchange, right, for the transaction to happen, people should be in a position to understand each other's language, right? People should be able to understand what the investor is saying, and founders should be, investors should understand what the founder is trying to say, and then the founder should understand what the investor is trying to say. So now that is not so easy, right? That is not so easy. It's not a very theoretical construct. Today, people will be speaking in English, but still you'll understand that, oh, I don't understand, I don't know why is he saying that, right? I don't know. Or we can simply say that, no, I'm trying to tell him very clearly, but he simply does not understand, right? So this is one example of what we call as information asymmetry. So information asymmetry has multiple dimensions. We will try to cover some of it as we go along, but fundamentally it all boils down to what is called as information asymmetry. So that's if we are able to solve this problem, if you are able to solve this problem of information asymmetry, then I think we can significantly solve the problems that we have today in fundraising, right? So the issue is not about ideas, right? The issue is not about ideas, or the issue is also not about lack of capital. Today, if you see, many of you think that the startups that are getting funded, it's not adequate in India, right? So on an average, let's say about 5 to 7% of the startups that have been founded are the ones that get funded in India, right? So then, there is one side which will say that, there are not enough people who are willing to make an investment. So that means that people are talking about there is a supply constraint, right? There is a supply constraint, and the funding is not available. On the other hand, if you look at investors, they'll say, no, I'm waiting here with a load of money to invest. What I'm not getting is, I'm not getting an investable idea, right? Most of the idea are not, they're not fundable ideas, they don't actually have value in it, right? Or if you look at the entrepreneur, they'll say entrepreneurial thinking, this is probably the best idea that, it can really change the world, right? It can create so much of value. So what you really find is, there is both the sides are seeking their stand. People believe that, their version of their side is the story is true, but ultimately what happens is the transaction does not happen. So the reason the transaction does not happen is not because there is not capital, or not because the ideas are not fundable. It's just that there is a problem of information asymmetry, right? So, when I started to really look at this aspect from an academic, or as an entrepreneur, I wanted to see if we can somehow address this gap of information asymmetry. So now let me move to the next slide, and then I will show here. So I'm showing here, a line here. So whatever is written in this script is essentially means that I'll give you $1 million, right? So now, since we are all very familiar with English, and I have translated what is given in the script, and it essentially means that I will give you $1 million. So now everybody can understand, right? Now everybody can understand, everybody can, identify what this is all about, but still, will the investment happen, right? Will the investment happen? So then comes the next problem. So the next problem is credibility, right? I mean, credibility. I can understand this, and I can understand the statement that you'll give me $1 million, but how can I believe you, right? How can I believe you, right? So that is essentially the trust factor, right? Obviously today we have, so today we have entrepreneurs who actually are, obviously going to pitch with, with the different people. And then, I mean, as an entrepreneur, you have to tell a story, right? I've given a very, very simple thing. So you tell a story that I can give you $1 million. So the investor, first thing is, how do I believe, right? I mean, how do I believe that this story is credible? How do I believe that, even if this is credible, that you'll be willing to pay? So this essentially there's an element of a trust factor involved here. Right? See, ultimately, we should also, realize that, most of the, ultimately the world of finance, how much ever we can talk about contracts and all of these things, right? Ultimately it all runs on trust, particularly in the Indian context, right, where enforcing a contract is such a very difficult process. People should ultimately go by trust, right? I mean, is a person whom I am putting my money on, is he trustworthy, right? Is he trustworthy? How can I ensure that the investment that I made in good faith is able to. Because there are so many instances the investors have been very they've been significantly burnt. I mean, if you really look at the returns that the investors, I'm talking about the venture investors who are invested in startups, right? So if the returns that many of the investors have got, it's in the range of about 12%, 11 to 12%, right? And 11 to 12%, they are nominal returns, right? I mean, if you really look at real returns, it comes to about 7%, right? Or even much lesser than that, right? 7%, 6%, these are the real rate of returns. And these are all I'm talking about in rupee terms, right? And we all know that much of the investment is coming from overseas, right? Most of the investment in Indian startups are coming from abroad. They're all dollar investments. So if you account for the rupee depreciation, technically speaking, most of the investors have not recovered their capital. So I was speaking, whatever, to an investor, and then he kind of conveyed the dismay that exists among many investors. I'm talking about both individuals and institutional who invest in startups, right? They are all dismayed because they find that in general the prosperity in the Indian economy has increased quite a bit, right? Today you find many of the shops are very well done, and people are going in fancy cars. A lot of people are traveling, they are all eating out, people are spending money, right? People are spending money, but then investors have not got their returns, right? So they find that there is something that's really wrong that's actually happening here. That means many of the startup founders, it's not the question of their ability to repay the investors, but then there's a question of intent, right? So people are looking at, there is a big deficit, right, in the trust factor with the Indian entrepreneurs. So this is the second big reason as the problems in fundraising. Let's try to see how we can, look at each of these one by one. Right? So let me take a pause here and then see if there are any questions. Right. I'll see if there are any questions before I continue. I'll stop the share here for a minute, and then see if there are any questions. Okay. Any questions, any thoughts that you want to share with me or to the group?
Thanks a lot, Professor, for your time. This is Srini. I'm part of RTBI here. Yes, how to build the credibility or trustworthiness is really the onus of our every startup. Yeah, we look forward to hear from you how to take it forward there.
Yeah, right. Let me kind of touch upon it as we go along. Right. If there are no other questions, let me go back to my presentation again. Right. Right. So share this. Right. Okay. So one of the ways when that people try to build trust, I mean, as I kind of going to talk about, is You know, you should really look at, I mean, it's a old saying, right? Birds of similar feathers flock together, right? Because it's not the question of inherently somebody is trustworthy, somebody is not, right? It's just the question of, are there shared value systems, right? And these shared value systems come are actually come are understood in a way between people of similar backgrounds, right? So for example, I'm just giving you a right. So there is obviously be a lot more comfort. Let's say, for example, I mean, I'm just taking a random example of China here. I mean, do you think there is going to be a good trust factor between, let's say, and between India and between two individuals from India and China? And that's, I mean, I believe that for a variety of reasons, right? For a variety of reasons, the building the trust when the diversity is too large is going to be very difficult. So individually, each of them might actually be trustworthy, right? But then when there is significant divergence in the backgrounds of two different things, getting that element of trust is going to take a long time, right? On the other hand, an Indian might more comfortably trust another Indian, and similarly a Chinese can actually comfortably trust another Chinese, right? But if you remove those and then and then bring in two individuals from very very different backgrounds, getting into the trust is going to, I mean, professionally people may get along very well, but to investment to happen, it should get beyond that profession, so it has to build in trust. So trust essentially means that we have to reduce the diversity, we have to bring in people of similar backgrounds together. So this brings into the second problem. The problem of credibility can be very well solved if, let's say, an entrepreneur and an investor can have similar backgrounds, right? Then what happens is, they understand each other very well. They probably speak the same language. They have shared ideals and value systems and beliefs and whatnot, right? Then the credibility can be easily achieved. So I'm talking about all achieving in a shorter duration, right? Because as an entrepreneur, we can't have endless time at our disposal, right? You want to really quickly get onto investment. Remember, if you work on anything, you can build in trust, right? You can build in trust between people of very very different backgrounds, but then it may take time. And as an entrepreneur, we want everything to have been done yesterday, right? So we want things to be happening very fast, right? So to be able to compress the trust factor, to be able to compress the time that it takes to create the trust, we need to actually look at reducing the diversity between the entrepreneur and the investor, right? So now let me actually go to the next point that I wanted to talk about. So I will add this. Then I'm saying that I will give you $1 million, and then obviously, if Warren Buffett says this, right? Warren Buffett says this, I will give you $1 million, right? So then obviously that makes a big difference, right? That makes so who says this, right? Who says this makes a big difference, right? So that brings to the next point, the track record, right? Is a track record. So if Warren Buffett says this, that he can give 1 million, nobody is going to doubt it, because he has a track record of meeting the investors' expectations. He has a track record of giving returns on the capital that has been invested in him, and so on and so forth. So were investors going to really believe the story when they look at the past performance, right? So why I'm really looking at past performance here, simply because in the absence of trust, right? In the absence of trust, if you're going to find it very very difficult to bring in the trust factor, people tend to believe the past performance. As I was just mentioning, that let's say even who does not know Warren Buffett, and any Indian, for example, can easily go ahead and say, if Warren Buffett says he can give $1 million, I'll go and blindly invest. There is a significant diversity, right? There is significant diversity between the investor and somebody who's taking the money. but still the investment will happen. Why? Because there is a track record of past performance. The past performance is a significant comfort factor when somebody wants to make an investment, right? So now again, if you really look at in the case of startups, right, we are looking at early stage startups. Early stage startups, apart from time, apart from capital, another important shortcoming, right? Another important shortcoming is there is no past performance, right? There is no past performance because the company has just been formed. We don't know whether there is a market for the product or the service. We don't know at what price people will buy. We don't know whether I have the ability to deliver. Uh, there are so many questions, unanswered questions, right? So there is a difficulty in terms of looking at the past, and we can't really showcase anything, right? The past performance. When there is obviously one category, so there are people with experience, people who have several years of experience in running a business or in working for a corporate. So obviously they may showcase their past performance, the ability to deliver in their previous job, right? That might help, right? So that might help, but still, most of the investors, being hard nosed as they are still going to say, are you still, will you be in a position to translate your capabilities, your competency to a completely new area, right? So that's again, could be a problem. So what I am saying is, if the past performance is something in, is an area that is related to the existing venture, and if it is related to the existing venture, then investors would probably attach a greater weightage to that, right? So this is also a significant problems for an entrepreneur looking at fundraising, the absence or a lack of track record, right? The past performance. I'll again go to the next point. So this, right? I will give you $1 million in 1 year if you invest $1,000 now, right? So a startup makes a claim to an investor, right? All this might be, outrageous claims, but as an entrepreneur, as a startup founder, this is what we do, right? When we go to an investor and go to a pitch deck, and then we make outrageous promises, right? So I tell them, this statement is maybe a little exaggerated, but ultimately that is what we are all doing, right? I'm including myself in that boat, right? As if I wear a hat of the entrepreneur, I'm still trying to, sell, make believe kind of a story, right? I am going to give you $1 million if you are able to invest $1,000 now, right? So then the question becomes, is feasibility, right? Is it feasible at all, right? Is it feasible? Somebody is making such large promises. Is it feasible? How is it possible that somebody can actually deliver such humongous returns, right? That too in a very short span of time, right? So here, there is a problem of familiarity, right? So when people are familiar with a particular aspect of the industry, then they may be able to appreciate, the possibility of whether it can happen or it cannot happen, whatever it is, right? Ultimately, as entrepreneurs and founders, we're all selling an idea, we're all selling a dream, right? We're all selling hope, we're all selling potential, whatever it is, right? So we will have to communicate, right? We'll have to communicate to somebody who can understand the potential, right? So if we are not able to identify somebody who can understand the potential, if somebody is not very familiar, then nobody, we will can't question the feasibility, right? Again, let me take the example of Warren Buffett, right? So Warren Buffett, it does not invest in many of the technology companies, right? It does not know many because the logic is very simple. I'm not familiar. I don't understand this industry. I don't understand how it works. So when people don't understand how an industry works, then they immediately tighten their purse strings. I'm talking about seasoned investors. I'm talking about novice investors. All kinds of things, right? So people should be fundamentally able to understand the industry before they can. You may have a track record, right? You may have a track record You may be able to have trust. You may be able to completely understand each other's language, but then it's still important that you are familiar, right? You are talking to an investor who's familiar to what you are doing. He is familiar with what you are trying to do. So let me kind of go to the next step. I'll just take a small water break here. So let me expand this one more, right? I am now saying that I will give you $1 million in 1 year by producing bubble gum if you invest $1,000 now, right? So this is a claim a startup is making, right? So they have said that their time frame is done. They said they'll give you in 1 year. They've said how much they'll give you. They said $1 million. And they've also said how are they going to give you, right? Their businesses, their business is XYZ. Here I'm saying that they are trying to produce bubble gum, right? So imagine, imagine you are in the shoes of an investor, and a startup comes and makes you these kinds of audacious statement, right? So what will be your first reaction, right? So the first reaction would be, maybe this guy is out of his mind, right? So this guy might be the startup founder is maybe out of his mind, right? Making some outrageous claims like this, right? So what is the problem here, right? So the problem is, so if you actually go to an entrepreneur and ask him, so there will be a very very detailed projections, right? He would completely know, what how much of units he has to produce, what will be the cost per unit, at what price he will going to sell, and who will all be the buyers, and basically the pathway to generating $1 million to give back to the investor in 1 year time. It will be completely, or I'm saying reasonably clear in the minds of the entrepreneur, right? But the investor is unlikely to buy that story, right? So essentially what we are really seeing here is, we are really seeing problems in multiple dimensions, right? Problems in multiple dimensions. So we are really talking about a problem of information asymmetry. There is an issue in terms of trust. There is an issue in terms of past performance. There is an issue in terms of, is it feasible? There is an issue in terms of ability, capabilities. There are a lot of things, right? There are a lot of things that are really resulting into what is called as this very very limited number of startups that are getting funded, right? So I am going to, and on the next part of my presentation, I am going to share a few ideas in terms of what is it that can be done to be able to overcome this particular aspect, right? So let me take a pause here. I'll stop the share for a few minutes, and then see if there are any questions and thoughts that you would like to share. Right? You can also share any of your experiences. And obviously the way I have put here is a very very it's a stylized representation in terms of what we normally pitch to potential investors. Any questions that we have? Nothing at all?
Professor, I
So
think we
this brings
can.
to me the next topic. I just wanted to check how many of can we really post it in the chat box? Let's say, for example, if there is one question that we should all discuss, right? Though what will that be? So then there is a question from Daireshil. Please help us understand the entire process of fundraising, right? I will talk about it a little in a short while, but let's say if each one of you have a question, or if one of you have a viewpoint and that you would want to be discussed, right? What will that be, right? Maybe you can post it in the chat box, and then we can probably group some of these, and then we can try and discuss. Okay, so now if there are no questions here, I will just wait for a few more seconds. Okay, all right. So let me uh, go back to the screen sharing mode. Right, I will share the screen. Okay, so let me move on and see. First of all, as an entrepreneur, we all have to understand. So there is an inherent conflict between the founder and the investor. Right? So that's the nature of the animal, right? So let's say that we are kind of moving beyond, right? So we are putting our own money, no problem. The family is investing as no problem, and then there are friends investing in us, no problem. But the moment we are going to the next, right? Whatever we call it, basically we call it the fund, right? Uh, uh, we, we call it the financier, right? So founder, family, friend, and financier. So the moment we go to a financier, the moment we go to an investor, we have to realize that the two different animals. There is an inherent conflict, right? There is an inherent conflict, and that needs to be recognized, right? So we can try and minimize the conflict, but it can never be completely eliminated, right? And to a certain extent, it is believed that this conflict is essential. This conflict, it's not that it cannot be eliminated, it needs to be eliminated, but this conflict need to exist to ensure that the capital markets function very well, right? The tensions between the investor and the entrepreneur should necessarily exist, right? For to be able to get better. Now, the first step is, let's say, for example, as many of you have just mentioned, I would like to know the entire process by which fundraising happens. Right? We will come to it shortly, but then, first is, you determine, right? You determine that you're going to find a startup. And then after finding the startup, you also determine that you need capital. And then, the capital, you say that I can't bring in all the capital myself because there is so much of capital that is needed, and I am not in a position to bring all the capital myself, right? So then what happens is, then you see I need to get an investor, and so therefore I need to go on the external capital. So the moment you look at an external capital, so then what you need to do is, you as a startup entrepreneur, you feel that, oh, I don't know much about the entire process of fundraising, right? I don't know about the process of fundraising. There is a lot of process involved. There's a lot of technicalities involved. I am simply overwhelmed. I am simply overwhelmed, by what all needs to be done. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to make a mistake. I want to hire some expertise which will help me or who will help me to navigate the entire fundraising process. Right? So it's like having a guide, right? A guide will be very helpful. Without a guide, we may probably, step on a milestone, which can be fatal. Or without a guide, we may take too much time. Right? Or without a guide, we may not even be successful, for example, right? We may end up, going in a wrong direction completely, right? So we end up wasting a lot of time and also, putting us. So essentially, we need somebody, you can help with, right? And who is that somebody, right? And who is that somebody? So that somebody is actually what is called as an investment banker, right? In essence, it is basically an intermediary, right? In any other in any other transaction, an investment banker will be called as a broker, right? I mean, you go to real estate, there is a broker, right? You go to marriage, there is a broker. And then you want to, go to insurance, there is a broker. If you want to trade in stocks, there is a broker, right? So broker is a very, very an acceptable actor between two parties who have very, very different interests, right? So this broker is supposed to play a very important role in bringing the interests of both these two parties together, right? In some fashion, right? By magically is supposed to do that, right? Many people obviously are all relying on relying on these intermediaries, relying on brokers on several ways, right? Um, either it can be a person or it can be a platform, correct? So which is the biggest platform today that connects between two different people? So there is eBay, right? Sorry, not eBay, Airbnb, right? Many of you might be very familiar with the Airbnb, right? So there are people who are listing the properties. There are people who are going to, there are people who are going to, stay in those properties. You don't believe the person who's letting out the property, but then you believe Airbnb, right? You believe Airbnb when they say that this property is good and this is the kind of facility, this is the rating, and so on and so forth, right? So essentially, Airbnb is akin to like an investment banker, right? They make transactions happen, right? They make transactions happen between two parties who have conflicting interests. In the same way, in the case of fundraising for startups, also there is an investment banker, there is an intermediary who will reduce the conflict, right? Who will reduce the conflict. In essence, he may actually make a translation. He will translate what the entrepreneur says to the investor, and he will come back to the entrepreneur and then translate what the investor says to the entrepreneur, right? So that means he's trying to reduce the information asymmetry, right? He's trying to reduce the information asymmetry in some sense. He's trying to build in an element of trust, right? Why? Because both the entrepreneurs and the investor trusts an investment banker, right? So that is very critical, right? The critical part is to identify. I mean, it can be a platform, it can be a person, it can be anything, right? It can be anything which can actually help you to facilitate the process of investment. Why? Because the investment process is very specialized. It is complicated. As an entrepreneur, you may not have the experience to go all by yourself. So therefore, why don't you hire expertise, right? Why don't you hire expertise, right? When you say hiring expertise, you can say that, okay, now should I hire within the company or should I hire it on a contractual basis? Should I outsource it? So if there is any task that is going to be done repeatedly, you are going to do it on a daily basis, right? Then it may be worthwhile to hire the expertise internally to the company, right? You can recruit and make an employee who's an expert in that. But if there is something that is going to happen once in a while, right? Once in a blue moon, then why do we need to hire that expertise internally? Why do we have to have it, right? You don't buy a plane, you don't buy a plane for yourself if you're not going to fly every day, right? I mean, I'm just giving you an example, right? So if you're not going to use an investment banker on a daily basis, because you don't go for fundraising every day, you go for fundraising and then you utilize the funds and then you go for another fundraising. So maybe a firm can actually look at fundraising maybe about 5 or 6 times, when they are in the till the growth stage, right? And for that purpose, you don't have to hire an investment banker internally because they are very expensive, right? So basically go to an investment banker and then you look at helping you out with the transaction, right? So that is what it is. So the next question is that we have, I'm talking in a very general terms. I'm talking in a very general term. So if you look at it, again, there is no one innocent banker, right? There is no one innocent banker. So there are two investment bankers, right? There is somebody who is representing the investor, that the buy side, right? Why buy side? Because they are buying equity, they are buying shareholding of the startup company. So therefore, they are representing the buy side. So you have one innocent banker who is representing. When I say representing, they are essentially being paid by the investor, and they are essentially responsible to take care of the interests of the investors, not the entrepreneurs. Right. So that is the buy side. Right. They are essentially looking at taking the response of the investor. And then we need to have another intermediary who represents the startups entrepreneurs. So that is called as the sell side. Right. So a sell side intermediary looks at taking care of the interests of the startups or the entrepreneur. So now, because both of them are innocent bankers, right, or both of them belong to the same profession, so they have a way of talking to each other, right? They have a way of talking to each other. They understand each other language, and thereby they are able to communicate the concerns of both the parties, in a very significant fashion. So when somebody is looking at a fundraising, I said initially to go to investment banker, but then which investment banker that you will go to? If you are an entrepreneur, you will go to a sell side investment banker, and if you are an investor, you will go to a buy side investment banker. So now let me look at what is the challenge. Right, the challenge here today that we have is for very early stage startups, there is virtually no sell side innocent banker, right? There is virtually no sell side innocent banker. That means you can't engage somebody. There is nobody available who's willing to provide services representing the interests of the entrepreneur for early stage startups. Now, obviously, when the company becomes bigger, when the company becomes, let's say, this like Ola or is something like housing or Oyo, or all of it, when the company becomes bigger, obviously there are people who are willing to represent, right, who are willing to represent on the side of the entrepreneur as well. But in the very early stages, let's say for example for companies in the first 4 years, there is virtually no innocent banker who is willing to represent the entrepreneur, period, right? There is nobody, right? Now, when I say nobody, there is no major activity that is actually happening there. Then what does an entrepreneur do, right? An entrepreneur then naturally will have to rely on the buy side intermediary, right? Because there is no sell side intermediary, you have to rely on some innocent banker. So the startup entrepreneur ends up relying on the buy side intermediary. So now what happens, right? So you are obviously getting into somebody who is not paid by you, who does not take care of your interests, and then he's taking care of the interests of the investor. So naturally, uh, things are going to be a little difficult, right? Things are going to be a little difficult because you may not speak the same language. You may not have your expectations might be very different, but ultimately, you are really looking at utilizing the services of the buy side. So I'll give you examples of for some of the buy side platforms, right? So today we have several, angel investing platforms, right? You have Chennai Angels, you have Mumbai Angels, you have several angel investing platforms. So they're all buy side platforms, right? They're all buy side platforms. And there are so many business plan competitions, right? There are so many pitch deck presentations that all is happening, right? So they're all buy side platforms. Why? Because they're all representing the investors, right? They may not represent all the investors, but they are actually getting paid for the services by the investors. So therefore, they're essentially buy side platforms. Now, what will be the interest of the buy side platform? Remember, the buy side platform is going to take care of the interests of the investor, right? Not that of the entrepreneur. So what will be the interest of the buy side platform? So the interest of the buy side platform will be, I want to get the best possible deals for the investor, right? I want to get the best possible deal for the investor, because I am representing the investor. I have to take care of the interest of the investor. So I have to get the best possible deal, right? Best possible deal. It could be best possible company, or it could be investment at the lowest possible valuation, whatever it may be, right? So he is essentially going to look at taking care of the interests of the investor. And remember, what is the impact that it has for the entrepreneur? So the impact that it has for the entrepreneur is going to be phenomenal, because what does an entrepreneur need? An entrepreneur would want to quickly complete the fundraising process, right? That's it, right? They want to meet as few investors as possible and complete the fundraising process, right? And an entrepreneur would like to have as high a valuation as possible, right? As high a valuation as possible, in his company. But these are diametrically opposite to what the buy side, intermediary functions, right? A buy side intermediary will go say, I'm going to look at as many deals as possible. I'm going to look at a large number of deals, and then present a very, very small short list for the investor to invest. So that's why you find, in many of the angel platforms, they see thousands of deals. For example, if you look at the India Angel Network, right? India Angel Network, would have probably seen about 20 to 25,000 investment opportunities in a year, right? That is the kind of we are talking about, right? And that they'll probably invest in about 25 to 30. So look at the ratio, right? So look at the ratio. As far as the buy side intermediary is concerned, is a roaring success, right? Now he's managed to get 25,000 deals to the investor, right? His job is done, right? He received an S grade for his job, right? He got 25,000 deals, and on this 25,000, investors are investing in one, right? Investors are investing in 25, let's say, for example, one in 1,000, right? 1 in 1,000. So maybe this is, this is such a tough probability, right, to be able to, getting funded. So this does not meet the needs of the entrepreneur, right? This does not meet the needs of the entrepreneur, because then he is really playing on very, very low probabilities, right? He's playing on very low probabilities. A startup entrepreneur would essentially want to quickly, raise capital, whereas an investor would like to see as many startups as possible before he decides to make an investment. There are many other festivals also happen. For example, there are pitch deck festivals that actually happen. There are hundreds of people making presentations, and then maybe a couple of them will actually get the funding. Right? Why? Because when you have people pitching into you, you have the luxury of choosing the best. Right? You are the one. The investor has the luxury of choosing the best. But what's a casualty? The casualty is the entrepreneur himself, because an entrepreneur spends a lot of time in developing the business, and he also gets good knowledge. He also has good knowledge about the. So this is a conflict. This is the conflict between the founder and the investor. Somehow we will have to mitigate this conflict, and so you say that, okay, can we really look at a sell side agency that takes into consideration the interest of the entrepreneur, right? So why there is no sell side investment banker? Simply because economics does not work, right? As an entrepreneur, you are raising, let's say, for example, maybe a few lakhs, or maybe you are raising maybe up to a couple of crores. Then the economic does not work, because the investment banker feels that the amount of effort that is needed for him to get a couple of lakhs in terms of his finance charges, um, it does not make sense, right? It does not give him the adequate return on the investment that he's making, right? So therefore, there is nobody interested to provide the service on a sustainable basis. So I saw this as an opportunity, right? I saw this as an opportunity, and then I said, so can we really do something? Can we really develop a platform, that is entrepreneur centric? There has to be something that represents the entrepreneurs. There has to be something that represents the startups, right? Can we create a startup centric and entrepreneur centric platform, which will then be very useful, which will be very useful for let's say, various buy-side platforms. It can also be useful for the investors in several fashions, and so on and so forth. So this is what we have done, and Winos to be developing a sell-side platform that represents the entrepreneurs, that ensures that entrepreneurs meet as few investors as possible before they are able to secure the investment. So let me again take a short pause here and then see if there are any questions and thoughts that people want to reflect upon. Okay. Any questions, any thoughts here?
Professor, there are a few questions in the chat box if you'd like me to read them out.
Yeah, I'm also looking at the chat box.
Yeah, okay, sure.
So there are a few things I will comment upon.
Sure.
So Dhaireshil's question is, please help us understand the entire process of fundraising. Right? So Dhaireshil, could you help me to kind of understand what is it that I would kind of expect when you mean process? What do you mean by the process of fundraising?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Dhaireshil.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Good
Sir,
afternoon.
what I mean by process is for a first-time entrepreneur when he's looking on developing his product, technology, and services, how much time he should spend on this particular activity. As you said, it is going to be a one-time activity. So, getting into nitty-gritties and what all things you can kind of outsource or founder has to do all those things. So, these are some things which I wanted to know.
See, for example, for an early stage company, right, for a very, very early stage startup, it is inevitable that, much of the work will have to be done by the founder himself, right, or the promoter himself. There is, no escaping that fact. So the reason is most of the investors would directly want to meet with the entrepreneur, right? And that is number one. And second, I was just mentioning the amount of funding and all that they raised is not very large, and the fees that that an investment banker or anybody that you can outsource that you will get is going to be so minimal, so it is not very attractive for anybody, right? So there are people who may actually guide you, but then how much ever we wish, oh, can't somebody help me in this process, right? Can't somebody help me in this process? That is not going to happen, right? So the sooner as entrepreneurs, we realize that it is in our best interest that we actually take charge of it and then run with it, the faster and the quicker it will be, right? Trying to find whether somebody will be able to help me, somebody will be able to help me the business plan, will somebody help me to help me to connect with the investor, will somebody write me the introduction note? All of these things, theoretically possible, but in practice it does not work. And so therefore, invariably the entrepreneur will have to spend a lot of time when they go for raising money. And naturally, the promoter has limited energy, the promoter has limited bandwidth. So invariably, during the process of fundraising, the attention gets diverted from business to fundraising. So naturally, the business will suffer. So therefore, the best is to complete this fundraising as quick as possible so that you can concentrate on the business, right? So one aspect that people try to do is, if there is a funding team, if there are senior members, if there are two people who are senior members in the founding team, then people try and split responsibilities. One of the founders looks at fundraising, then there are others who try to look at the business operations, right? Uh, but otherwise it has to be very tactically handled, right? So all said and done, from the time you think in your mind that I think I have to go for fundraising, from that time till the actual money comes to your bank account, it can take about 6 months, right? So that is a time frame that one has to budget for themselves, because the process of thinking that you have to go for fundraising till you actually go for fundraising itself, you need a lot of mental preparation time, right? Your mind should be ready, right? That to be able to answer all the questions that the investors might ask, to be able to tell your story very clearly in a very convincing fashion and all that, right? So that essentially is the time that it takes. In terms of process, then what happens is, I mean, there is a general process is you have to really develop a business plan, and from the business plan you develop a pitch deck, and the pitch deck you actually go ahead and make a presentation. And after the presentation, there is what is called the process of signing up a term sheet, and people sign a term sheet. And after signing the term sheet, there is something called as shareholders agreement. And then after the shareholders agreement is signed, and then the money will come to the company's account. So this is the process, right, that is involved in the fundraising. This process itself takes a lot of time. It may take up to 6 months. So most of the time investors will ensure that your business is compliant with all the existing laws of the land. For example, if there is any licensing that you have to have, whether the licensing is already done, or are you violating somebody's intellectual property? So there will be a certain amount of understanding and due diligence before the entire process is complete, right? So this is the process of fundraising, and I'm not sure whether I have answered your question, but you have anything in particular that you want me to get into detail, I can do that, Dhairishil.
Yes, sir, I have understood. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is from Deepak Raj. Can you please share some thoughts on equity dilution during pre-seed and seed funding? How much dilution percentage to be considered and some standard industry practice, right? Um, so it again, it's a very optimal. It's just to be very optimal, right? So when you go to a shop, you want to be a dish to be a certain spice, right? And the spice should not be too hot or it should not be too mild, right? It has to be at the right. Right? So that's something very true as to how much one should dilute, right? You should dilute it in such a way that as founder, you don't lose too much of shareholding, and you should dilute it in such a way that the percentage is meaningful enough for the investor, right? So it's actually has to be a win-win, right? So normally what happens is, what is it something that will be meaningful, right? Will 1% be meaningful? Of course not. Will 2% be meaningful? Of course not. So people have really looked at it. People have really looked at contacting many investors to find out what is it that can be meaningful, right? What is it that can be meaningful? And that number falls somewhere between 15% to 20%, right? Meaningful can be anything, right? I mean, meaningful can be 50% also could be meaningful, 60% also could be meaningful for the investor, but it does not make sense for the founder to dilute so much, right? So normally what people do is they will look at, okay, I am going to dilute, 15%, I am going to dilute 20%. I am talking about the initial stages, right? I'm talking about the initial stages. Let's say, for example, till you raise the first 2 or 3 rounds, people are looking at a dilution of about 20%. There is nothing standard. In fact, the standard in the venture capital and funding industry is there is no standard, right? Each and every business is unique. Each and every investor is unique. Each and every investment situation is unique. So there is no standard. So you should not really worry about, okay, is there a standard, right? There is no standard at all. But there are some very broad thumb rules, right? The thumb rule is what that I have mentioned. You should really look at, if you're looking at fundraising, please don't dilute more than 15-20% in the initial stages. Even if you want to dilute more than 15-20%, that means you are wanting to raise more money. So don't raise all the money at one go. You can split capital, you can split the requirement in multiple stages and raise, so that at any particular duration, you are not diluting more than 15 to 20%. Right? At the same time, if you offer too less, right? I'm saying that I'm going to give an investor 5%, and I will just maybe raise very less sum. Maybe I'll raise 2 or 3 lakhs, whatever it may be, right? So if you kind of leave out, maybe in, let's say, the incubation cell or any of those which probably are having shareholding like 4% and 5% and so on. Normally an investor will look at a meaningful shareholding that will be about 15 to 20%, right? So if you offer anything less than that, right? If you offer anything less than that, the investor is unlikely to be interested, because they say, okay, fine, I'm getting 1%. What do I get in this? What rights do I get for the 1%? How will it benefit me, right? So try and put together an amount that is not too large, whereby you have to dilute a lot more, or at the same time it is not too low, so that the investors are able to get a meaningful shareholding, right? So that is a question by Deepak Raj. Deepak Raj, did I kind of answer your question?
Hi, sir. Yeah, sir. I got the answer, sir.
Oh, thank you, Deepak Raj. Thank you. And then there is some question from the admin. What are the critical
Professor,
aspects?
that is Ms. Suchitra from Geeta. She's logged in as admin.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Geeta is one of our startups, yes.
Oh, right. So what are the critical aspects to cover while making a pitch deck? See, ultimately, what people are trying to look for in a pitch deck is brevity, right? Are you able to say everything in a short span of time? I mean, as you were just mentioning, I wouldn't mind telling you. So we are probably also meeting a few investors in the fundraising process, and then the first thing we're trying to look at a potential investor, and the investor says, "Okay, I can give you exactly 35 minutes," right? So investors do not have much time, right? So you will have to really, really summarize it at a very, very quick time. So from the interest of brevity, so a pitch deck biggest characteristic is it should cover all the important information and also be brief. Right? I mean, it may be think that it is an oxymoron. How can you actually cover all the information and then be brief? But then as entrepreneurs, we are so used to meeting these kinds of multiple expectations. I'm sure we can also meet, and I think there are several pitch deck formats that are available, which will help you to understand. The second aspect on making a pitch deck is not just also in terms of content, but also in terms of the look and feel, right? It just not only the message, but is it also it's also attractive enough in terms of design, right? That is actually, so remember, both of them are important, right? We need to have good content and also package it very nicely for the pitch deck to be interesting, for the interesting to people to look at. If you focus only on packaging, no content, obviously investors have seen several thousands of pitch decks or hundreds of pitch decks, sorry, and they will easily make out which is fluff and which is content, right? So that is number one. You get easily eliminated if you focus only on packaging without any content. On the other hand, if you focus a lot on content but not clear on packaging, the investors will be scratching their head. Oh, okay, fine. The information is somewhere there, but I'm not able to find out where is that information. Correct. So that's again a big problem, right? Then they will say, no, I don't have the time to really look searching for information, so he loses interest. So the pitch deck should actually be packaged well with good content. So what are the aspects that they should cover in the pitch deck? Right? So today there are plenty of formats that is available, right? If you look at, let's say, for example, what are the most successful pitch decks, you will get pitch decks that have been funded by Y Combinator, right? Or if you go to any particular investment forums, they'll say, okay, fine, please give us a pitch deck in this particular format, right? So each and every organization, they have their own way of creating a pitch deck. So depending on which format you are comfortable with, you can just go ahead and choose a pitch deck. Right? Use a pitch deck. And then, there are questions that somebody asks, should I actually have a professional content writer, right? Professional content writer to be able to develop a pitch deck, unless until you have a lot of money, I wouldn't necessarily advise that you have to engage somebody professionally. See, remember, as an entrepreneur, the best person to convey what your business is all about is you as a founder, right? A third person trying to communicate as much as you can, it might not be possible, right? He can communicate better in terms of language. They can communicate more articulate maybe, but then it may not, be as passionful as probably you've done it yourself. Right? So, obviously, investors are not looking at only packaging aspect, right? Investors are looking at, is whatever you have written, right? Is it reflecting you? Is it reflecting your business? Is it your style, right? So don't, one need not actually be overwhelmed by challenges in not being able to make a very good pitch deck, or not being able to, have a very, very convincing copy in your pitch deck. It doesn't matter. All these are hygiene factors, which I'm sure that, you can work on. Um, so I've kind of broadly said, what you don't need to invite, because the moment you start, inviting somebody, the moment you start engaging an external agency to prepare your pitch deck, right? Obviously, they will come out with a very, very colorful document with your pitch deck, but then it's like a document which might probably lacking in a little bit of soul, right? You may not be so comfortable in presenting a pitch deck that others are prepared, right? Obviously, if you have money, I think maybe it's worthwhile, provided the content is all yours, right? Provided the content is all yours. But at no point in time, expect somebody to work magic on your business by preparing a pitch deck. That is very unlikely to happen, right? If people have said that, now there are so many businesses that have been successful and that have got funding because they have prepared the pitch deck. It's not because that they prepared the pitch deck. No, the pitch deck, yeah, they have prepared it, but then The business got funding because the core of the idea was good. The core of the business plan was good, right? Whatever the idea and the pitch deck was good, not just because the packaging was good, right? So that's what I would like to say. And I think you should probably also do a dry run before you actually start pitching to investors. You should do a dry run with potential investors, right? With potential investors, who may be your well wishers, who have actually done investing. If you can do a dry run and get their inputs, that will be extremely helpful for you, because when you go and meet to an investor, you get a lot of confidence. Remember, in most cases, getting a second chance with the investor is extremely difficult, right? So therefore you have to hit it right the first time, and therefore being well prepared is definitely helpful. And the second question that the same person has asked is, if time permits, how would you please could you please cover how to arrive at pre-money valuation, right? How to arrive at pre-money valuation. So again, there is no single route. Um, so normally when you look at valuation, the most robust is called as a fundamental valuation, which is a discounted cash flow approach to valuation. And a discounted cash flow approach to valuation in a startup scenario might not be the most appropriate, simply because there are too many assumptions, right? There are too many assumptions that you have to make, and then the model is only as strong as the assumptions that you make, right? So therefore, the credit that people give to a discounted cash flow approach might not be very, very good. Then what else could be approach? So then some people say that valuation is more an art than a science. Okay, so but then we believe that there is a logic. There is a logic with which investments happen at a certain value. So when there is logic, and then can we see what is the science behind the valuation? So what we have done in our platform at Vinos is we have developed a valuation estimator. And in that valuation estimator, we have been able to identify those factors that determine a valuation, determine the valuation in an investment transaction, right? So after having determined the factors, we are using the same factors to model the valuation for any startup, right? So what we are essentially trying to do is that we are trying to look at the different parameters and what are the weightages that different parameters have in determining the valuation. And then we identify those parameters in the profile startup, and then we are able to use the factors to predict the valuation, right? So that is what it is. Right? Remember, now today, you should also know that valuation can be a very, very tricky topic, right? And so what happens is, when there is something is tricky, normally what people do, people postpone decision making, right? So if they can help you postpone decision making, they'll postpone decision making to be able to avoid taking decision on a tricky situation. So today what's actually happening is, when there is a significant divergence in the valuation expectation between the investor and the entrepreneur, what is the common strategy is? Common strategy is, let us not bother about the valuation today. Let us discuss about the valuation in the future, right? In the future, based on the next round of investors, right? So when next round of investors come in at a certain value, then let us use that value as a basis for the current round, right? We will discount it as an agreed, based on agreed, based on agreed percentage, and then we will determine what is going to be the valuation in the current round. So this seems to be a very common route that people are taking, right? The people are taking, if I'm finding it very difficult to determine valuation today, let us look at what is called as a convertible approach. Let us look at making a decision in the future. So how will you be able to make a decision in the future when you don't know today, right? You will be able to make a decision in the future simply with the logic is that, in the coming months, there will be additional information that will be available, right? There will be more information available in the market. Then people can use that information to build financial models, and then using that financial models, they'll be able to expect the valuation. So now the question is for you at a very tactical level is, don't even try to model. Don't even try to model, put numbers to your startup for determining the valuation. I would probably simply suggest that use a tool, something like what Winos has, generate a ballpark number for valuation, and then go ahead and, go ahead and go over with your pitch deck, right? It's very unlikely, that an investor is going to come back and then tell you, I would want to see the calculations, because the investor does not have the time to see the calculations, right? I want to see the calculation, in which case you can, go back to the logic that we have in Winehouse on how we actually do the valuation and then share it with him. Right? That is my response. My response in summary on the valuation aspect is use a tool. Winehouse gives you a tool. A lot of other platforms gives you a tool. So therefore, try and use it rather than trying to do a lot of work on valuation. But I also have to determine. I also have to say one more tactical thing. Today, if you have to raise money from investors at a valuation, you have to get a valuation certificate done, right? So valuation certificate is, and there are merchant bankers who are authorized to give this valuation certificate. And now the question is, how do they determine the valuation? So remember, merchant bankers, they obviously cannot decipher the potential of a startup, because they're not really, thinking that way, right? But still, merchant banker, we will have to give a certificate from the merchant banker to to as a part of the compliance requirement, right? As a part of the compliance requirement, so you have to pay them some fees, right? I don't know, you have to pay them some 20, 30, 40, 50,000 rupees to get the valuation certificate done. And what they'll do is they'll ask you the data, right? When you ask them to the valuation certificate, they'll have to ask you data. So you give the data, and then they'll also probably request you to look at a suggested valuation, right? How much a valuation you're expecting, right? You give that also to them, right? And finally, what they do is they put everything together and type it in a paper and give it to you, and then you'll have to pay for that, right? So that is the process of getting the valuation certificate. Obviously, if somebody is looking at a valuation certificate, incubation cell can help in identifying, the person who can provide this kind of certificate, right? Okay, so I will. I think I have addressed these questions. Any further questions that we have on this aspect?
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, it was quite clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And then I'll go to the last slide of my share, and then I will share this last slide, and then so what I meant was in the beginning itself, I mean, how do you bring predictability? And how do you bring predictability? And so there is a tool called Winehouse Discover that we have developed. As members of the incubation cell, you all will have access to the platform. So I would suggest that you go ahead and try and use the Discover, and Discover packages whatever I'm going to say in this slide, right? It is completely packaged whatever I'm going to say in the slide. So all you have to do is like a plug and play. You just go ahead and give the information, and then it will give the output. The first thing is, there's a perfect startup is a fictitious entity. There is nothing called a perfect startup. Right? And there are going to be shortcomings. There are going to be weak points for any particular startup. If there is a perfect startup, then it does not need money, right? So many times when you go to an investor, the investors will be, be pointing at, oh, that is not here. This is not here. This is a drawback. This can be sometimes very, very demoralizing, right? So for that purpose, I'm telling you, there is nothing called as a perfect startup. Howsoever great a startup it is, there are going to be some shortcomings. There are some deficiencies, right? So like we have, right, we cannot really have, let's say, a square peg for a round hole, correct? So we need to have a round peg for a round hole, right? So similarly, when you are looking at investors, it is important to find an investor who is most suitable for that particular startup, right? So that means a square peg for a square hole. That is the kind of thing that we want to be looking at, right? So many times what happens is we are faced with a situation where where the investors may not be the right fit to a particular startup. So the onus is on the startup, the onus is on the founder to find out who is the right investor, right? To find out who is the right investor. So you need to remember that many factors have to come together for success, correct? Many factors have to come together, but failure can result from a single factor, right? If an investor does not like one particular aspect, he will not invest, right? But for an investor to become interested, there'll be so many things that have to come good. The promoter team has to be good, the business idea has to be good, the market has to be good, the product has to be good, the profitability has to be good, right? So everything has to be coming together for success, whereas failure can result in from a single factor. So please remember this, right? Please remember this, that you have to see how you can bring this success together, right? You have to see how you can bring these multiple factors to success together, and that means finding the right investor. That means finding the right investor, right? What I'm saying, alignment on the triad factor, right? So what is a triad here? Triad here, I'm mentioning these three factors. So there are some founder parameters, founder demographics, and so on and so forth. And then there is a startup parameter, and then there is an investor parameter, right? There is an investor diet, right? So for an investment to fructify, for an investment to happen, then all these three will have to be consistent, right? All these three will have to be consistent. All these three will have to be in alignment, right? So naturally, the founder has a certain background, right? The founder has a certain background, and based on that, the startup is formed, right? So those two things cannot be changed much, right? The founder's background cannot be changed much, but still, if you want to really come out with the founding team, you can really do that, right? You can really have a founding team. That means you are then technically changing the founder characters, changing the founder parameters, and so on, right? And then there is a startup, right? So obviously the startup, it emanates from aspirations of the founders, right? So therefore there's a founder and a startup, right? So these has to, in a way, align with the investor background. So that means if these are fixed, right? If the founder is fixed, if the startup is fixed, then is the investor is a variable. So you will have to find an investor who will gel well with this startup and with this group of founders. If there is no alignment, right? If there is no alignment here, I'm talking about a short-term alignment or long-term alignment, right? If there is no alignment on this triad factor, then getting investment is going to be extremely difficult, right? You may be continuing to meet as many investors as possible, right? But there has to be some alignment uh, on these three parameters, right? The founder characteristics, the startup characteristics, and the investor characteristics. So how do you do that? How do you actually make that alignment happen, right? How do you know which investor is the right investor for this particular startup? So that is where a platform like Discover can be very useful, right? So we have more than 3,600 investors in the platform. First itself, the number itself is very large, right? If there are maybe one or two or 10 or even 50, you may be able to possibly manage it on your own, right? But now we have a very large number of investors, 3,600 to be very precise, right? And then, when you have such a large number, it is not possible to be able to manually do the analysis, right? It has to be done using, technology, right? So what we have done is we have put together a technology that will suggest investor recommendations based on the startup characteristics and the founder demographics as well as the investor demographics. So these recommendations ensures that the cut of investors that are recommended, there these all aligned, right? There is an alignment of the founder parameters, alignment of startup, and then alignment of investor parameters. So that is extremely important, right? And it is not possible to do it manually, because manually can be time consuming. Manually there could be information shortages, manually it might not probably give the credibility, right? It may not be very user friendly, whatever it may be, right? So therefore we can rely on technology. And so we have developed a platform which is called as Winehouse Discover to specifically look at ensuring this alignment happens, and therefore the investors recommended as a part of this platform, they have a higher chance of looking at your venture favorably to even have a discussion. The final point I want to mention is there are two phases in the fundraising process, right? There is investor identification and the investment process, right? So it's very important to understand this. Uh, so when you say investor identification, there are 3,600 investors. Out of the 3,600 investors, which are the 10 investors who are going to invest in my startup, right? So that is the investor identification. And the investment process is, once the investor has been identified, then you go through the process, right? You make a presentation, you then negotiation, and then you have shareholders agreement, and then getting the amount credited to the bank account and all these things, right? Then there is an investment process. So all the activities associated in fundraising can be bucketed under these two categories: investor identification and the investment process. So for early stage companies, investor identification is what takes the bulk of the time, right? It what takes the bulk of the time, because there are too many investors, and to be able to manually do it, it is not going to be very efficient. And if you can use technology to be able to identify potential investors, it saves you a lot of time, right? Remember, sending an email to all the 2,600 investors saying that this is a business that is there, will you be interested in making an investment, all that, right? It's not going to work, right? You waste a lot of time, and it can be very, very frustrating as well, right? So if you can somehow shorten this investor identification process, then it can be a lot more beneficial for the entrepreneur. So this is where again we bring about this Wine House Discover, right? When we recommend investors, we are able to quickly compress the time it takes for investor identification. And then we come to the investment process. Once you identify the investor, what do you do next? You probably will go and meet the investor, and then maybe make a pitch deck, and then go through the process. So that is the investment process, preparation, and then finalizing the accounts, due diligence, and whatever it may be, right? So this process for an early stage company is not going to take much time, because there is nothing much than one can actually visualize or see. There is no track record, there is no financial analysis that can be done, right? So which takes most time is the investor identification. So if that investor identification process, the time taken is compressed, then it can significantly benefit the entrepreneurs. So a tool like Wine House that we have developed, it can significantly reduce the investor identification process, right? And which you can directly go ahead and reach out to the potential investors and then try and attract investment. So I have now come to the end of the presentation, and any questions, any thoughts, reflections, I'll be more than happy to discuss with you. So let me stop the share for now and then get back to it a little later.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor, for taking us in such detail and answering our questions. And, so much of elaboration throughout the session. Any questions? Now it's open to the startups to ask any questions.
Thank you so much, Professor. Adnan here. Sir, could you just share that first slide again, the asymmetry one, in the screen share, if it's okay?
So the first slide
yeah, before this.
This one?
Yeah, problem in startup fundraising, all the 3 points. I just wanted to make note of the third point.
Okay.
Yes, I think that's what I want. Yeah, thank you so much, sir. It was very helpful, very insightful. Thank you so much.
Um,
Uh,
Professor, thanks a lot for your thing. I'm looking forward for that Winos access where you suggested to take our own valuation and research, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
how do we access that, Professor?
Well, I think you can reach out to Kalyani. Kalyani can
Okay.
probably direct the person. There is somebody who's
Sure.
compiling from the incubation cell and
Yes,
giving
there
it to
is.
us, and then Kalyani can help. I specifically did
Yeah.
not want to touch on that because I didn't want to use this session to showcase the tool because it's already available for access. So I just wanted to keep it as a discussion open ended on some of the other thoughts that I thought I will share with you.
Thanks a lot, Professor.
Professor, I had a question. So while you were speaking, I looked at the Winos Discover platform, right? So there was filter by investor background. So is that important? I mean, so how important is that? Obviously, it's important. It is there in your platform. So, the investor's age and
So they're all because there are essentially psychographic profiling, right? It's all talking about people with similar interests, getting together. Let me take a good example. You might have heard about, let's say, for example, an organization like McKinsey, for example, right? So
yeah.
two McKinsey consultants, might have very similar ways of looking at things, right? And they probably have, they may be they're more trustworthy, they may be comfortable, and the wavelengths will be a complete, in alignment.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, an entrepreneur from, who's earlier worked in McKinsey is approaching an investor who's also probably worked earlier in the organization, and it just that the the basics are taken care of, right? So you don't have to really look at working the trust factor. You don't have to really look at working on the information asymmetry or any of these issues. You can directly go to an important point is, okay, is this what I'm interested in? Is this business going to make sense to me?
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any more questions? We have a question on the chat box, sir, from
Right.
Chandra Sainath. The question is whether a startup should have a CEO who's also a founder director, or preferable to hire a CEO. Then what should be given to CEO?
See, I'm assuming that all these questions become important only if we are looking at getting funding, right? If there is issue of if there is no funding needed for a startup, right? I mean, the startup is generating enough cash flows, I mean, then there's no funding needed. On the other hand, there are startups which can grow in a steady stream, then there is no funding needed, essentially bootstrapped, right? There are several startups that are bootstrapped, right? I mean, I don't know whether it is really possible in today's context. The number might be few, but then for example, Zoho Corporation is one that is completely bootstrapped, right? When it is bootstrapped, not looking at external funding, or really looking at satisfied with a very moderate growth funded completely by business cash flows, then all these questions does not really matter, right? It matters only the time that you're trying to look for external funding, because investors will be interested to know, okay, fine, is the CEO having adequate motivations to stay in the company? Because it should not be the case that I invest in the company and the next day the CEO leaves the company and goes, right? In which case the investment is a disaster, right? They would not like that. So therefore they'll say, okay, fine, the CEO should have some kind of a shareholding, right? They have shareholding, which will then give enough incentive for the CEO to stay in the company, right? So essentially what we are looking at here to answer the question, whether a startup should have a CEO who is also founder director, it need not be. The CEO need not be a director in the company. The CEO need not be a founder. Many times what happens is the founder has a passion, they'll start the business, but then the founder may not actually have, let's say, execution capabilities, right? Or the founder could be engaged elsewhere in other profession, another organization, or the founder may not really have the energy like, to run on the ground, right? So a CEO can be a different from a founder, right? That is no issue. But normally, when a CEO can be different from a founder, it is expected that the CEO has the mindset of the founder, right? In the sense that the founder makes a lot of sacrifices for the company. So one would also expect, I would say an investor would also expect the CEO to have a founder-like mindset. That means he's willing to make sacrifices. He's willing to work for moderate salaries in the initial to start with. He's willing to work on stock options and all of those things, right? So what should be given to the CEO? I think a little bit of ownership, right? When I say ownership, some shareholding, the CEO has. It will be giving a lot of comfort to the investor, right? Because the CEO has ownership, there is skin in the game, and he may not actually leave very easily because he gets a lot of value is created when the share prices appreciate. And then we have a question from Deena Dayalan. Hello, sir. How do I find the investors who is willing to invest in particular projects like environmental related startups? So very good question. Again, our platform will be very useful here, Deena Dayalan. You go to our platform, there is Discover, and then you can really do a variety of searches. You just simply type environment in the search bar. You will probably get results of investors who have invested or who are associated with environmental related projects. So that is probably the quickest way today in India, where you can find investors, who are associated or who can be considered as potential investors to any particular sector. It need not only be environmental. You can type in anything that you would like. For example, you want to type nanotechnology, you can type it, or you can type it textiles, you can type it, right? So we have a very, very extremely versatile searching tool that will help you to quickly identify investors, right? On any particular projects that you are looking at. So there is a question from, can you share the URL for Wynos Discover? Is there any subscription? Yes, so I'm just making it as I just make it a public message for people who are interested. So the website is www.wynos.in. The information on subscription is all available in the website. So you can just go and check the details, and if you're still having doubts, you can always reach out to us, and then we will be in a position to take it offline from this platform, right? So but that's it's all available there. I think there is subscription, but it is a very, very modest subscription. We want to make it easily accessible for all the entrepreneurs. So no entrepreneur should find a subscription too taxing at all. So there is a question from Harsh. Can you share more details about valuation of a new startup? How should one evaluate its actual market price and all? So Harsh, I still need some more information about this question before I can attempt to answer it. What do you mean by can you share more details about valuation of a new startup? Hello Harsh, am I audible?
Harsh, I think you're muted, so you can unmute yourself and ask your question directly.
Hello,
so
yes.
his mic is not working.
Okay, your mic is not working. Okay, so now let me try to attempt this question. More details about valuation. So as you were just mentioning, valuation, there are again, we have a tool that is available. So what we have to do is, typically speaking, investors would naturally get comfort, right, by precedents, right? So they'll say, okay, fine, I don't want to be the first person to take a decision, but I look at, are there any other similar startups that have been funded and at what valuation they have been funded, right? So once you are able to identify a comparable company and the valuation at which they have been funded, then it may be easy to convince an investor, because that is already, the benchmark is already set in the market, right? But how that benchmark came to be set, that nobody knows. It might have been based on another benchmark that has been set previously, right? So otherwise, in general, this is how valuation happens for early stage. They look at comparable companies that have been funded in the market and then take that as a benchmark. So the question is, finding comparable companies in the startup is not going to be so easy, right? If it's a public market, it's easy to find comparable companies. Let's say, what is a comparable company to, let's say, Amazon. So people may say Amazon's comparable company is Flipkart or Walmart, right? Or what is a comparable company to Infosys, right? And people say it can be, it can be Wipro, or it can be TCS, right? So comparable companies can be easily found for large companies that are in the public market, but then comparable companies for early stage companies might be very difficult, right? So that's where, one, we will have to use, again, some technology tools, use technology to find out what are comparable companies. And comparable companies need not be, just that particular sector, right? Comparable companies could be comparable in terms of age, comparable in terms of sector, comparable in terms of promoter background, right? There are so many other comparable in terms of the age of the company. So there are several factors that play a role in finding out what is a comparable company, right? So what you will have to do is, technically the valuation depends on finding a comparable company and using that information to project the valuation of a particular startup, right? So that's how the valuation works. All right.
Any
So
more questions?
yeah.
I think Harsh has replied also in the chat, so.
Yes, I'm also
Yeah.
seeing the chat window.
Yeah.
Right.
So if there aren't any more questions, I think I would like to wrap this up. So thank
Okay.
you,
So
Professor.
thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
thank
Kalyani.
you so
So
much. I think over the entire session, you've addressed all the questions the participants had, and you've also gone in detail into each of their questions as well. So thank you so much, sir. And thank you, participants, for staying through the session and asking engaging questions.
Yeah. So let me just add, I wish all them, very, very happy New Year. I hope that you're saying that this is the, start of the series. So let me wish you a very happy New Year.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Same to you.
Yeah, I think I can join each one of the people here, to congratulate the incubation cell in creating such a wonderful ecosystem. I mean, this is probably one of the best startup ecosystems that we have in the country today, right? And I think, so congratulations, and, in keeping it this way. And I'm sure that you will continue to support they continue to support and offer maybe many more such support services in the, coming days.
Yes.
Right. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you, participants.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.